Welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Samantha Postman, a true creative leader and thinker. So you're definitely in the right place today, Samantha. And you're very welcome to the podcast. You're very welcome to the show. Let's start by asking you to maybe introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do. So over to you, Samantha.
All right. Well, that is depending on the day, what I'm doing. That's one of the hardest questions to answer when people ask me. So I'll go with at the moment. At the moment, I'm actually I run a couple of companies. One of them is, my main one is a farm. My husband and I have an agricultural crop farm in southern Alberta, Canada. So I am a managing partner as well as a CFO for that company. And aside from that, I actually have an innovation company called Smart Arrow, and I do some consulting and advising and some innovation projects. I'm actually launching a new YouTube channel next week, and it's going to be on life mastery. It's under my name, Samantha Postman says, and it will be on Life Mastery 2.0. So essentially the theme of the YouTube is going to be everything that you should have learned in school to succeed, but weren't taught. It's going to cover things like finance, emotional intelligence, regulation. And I don't know how many people know this, but I'm actually a tax expert by first trade. And that was like my jive. Like that's where I was. And in my tax career, I actually did over 7,500 tax returns in over a 20-year period. So you learn a lot about people, government officials, organizations. I mean, finances are the most vulnerable anyone can be, because not only do you see their finances, which a lot of spouses don't even share with each other, you see their medical. So they figure if you've seen everything about them, education, where they came from, how they spend their money, absolutely, like I said, the most vulnerable, there isn't anything they won't tell you. So a lot of what I've learned is by interacting with thousands of people. And what's cool about taxes is you kind of get the synopsis every year of what happened the year before. And some of those clients I had over a 20-year period. And so I learned a lot, and I take that knowledge and I really help a lot of people through, life mastery, self-development, but as well as business consulting.
Wow, Samantha, that's an awful lot of tax returns.
I could do them in my sleep, I think,
bet
at
you
one
could.
point.
Right. And I don't know how we go from the world of tax to the farm and to what you're doing now as well, because from your businesses and your consulting, your advice, and I know you also speak an awful lot, don't you, about being a polymath and also this community of sort of modern polymaths, if I could use that term. So maybe could you just unpack that a little bit more? Because I know you're very involved in communities here. You've got a new site, by the time this episode airs, people watching or listening to this now, that site will be available to them. So can you tell us a little bit more about that side of what you do?
Yeah, so a polymath, for anyone who doesn't know what the term means, and we're more familiar with the term Renaissance man and more modernly Renaissance woman. So it's somebody who's accomplished and has mastery in at least 3 diverse disciplines. So the most common polymath that most people know about is Leonardo da Vinci, obviously. But modernly, we'd look at someone like Elon Musk as definitely a polymath. He's an engineer, he's marketing, he's CEO. I mean, we could just list off, he's a scientist. And so he's a master in multiple domains. And so modernly, I've started to notice that more people are re-embracing this polymathic type of life. And that's what I didn't actually know what a polymath was until some years ago. And someone's like, oh, you're a polymath. And I'm like, what? Well, farming, professional photography, tax, marketing, now web design, consulting. There's the list goes on. And I think that it's just someone who just loves to learn. We're curious, we're innovative. And I would go so far to say as a polymath is someone who's a learning addict. And we just love living in the present, and we are the happiest when we're learning something new or teaching it to somebody else so that they can learn something new. And so I started to create this community and this group of people who are like-minded like me. And it's pretty fun. We get on a call and we can ask each other a question. And the answers are so fast because essentially every single person in the room is like 10 consultants in one. So even when people hire me for business consulting or even life consulting, I'm able to take so many domains and teach it to them because I've got all of these different disciplines I'm very familiar with. It also helps that I had all those tax years because I got an inside view of so many different professions and walks of life and places and where you are in your age even. Like yesterday, I met a guy while I was waiting for an appointment, and he was telling me that he used to be a tech teacher for in school, like for primary school. And I was like, "Oh, you must love Chat GPT." And he's like, "I haven't heard of it." And he'd had a lot going on in his life, so he didn't know. So I'm like, "Let's get to it." So I pulled my iPad out, and right then and there, I showed him. But because I knew he was a teacher, I specifically tailored the lesson specifically to him because I used to be on an education committee for a school, so I understand how he thinks. And I was able to show him how you could create a lesson plan in literally minutes with an answer key, with answers and a poems for his students. And he like was blown away. But that's what a polymath can do. We can we can change up, and we're very, very versatile very quickly. In fact, I would say the very primary characteristic or skill of any polymath is that they're extremely versatile and very fast.
Very good. Thanks for sharing that, Samantha. And yeah, there are a few world famous polymaths that we could refer to, but the
Right.
one point that I want to come back to though is around education, because you said it at the
Yeah.
start about, you know, this teaching you the things that maybe you didn't learn in school. And there's quite a
Right.
growing argument, isn't there? And whether you're at sort of high level education, where by the time you finish the degree or the bachelor's or the master's or whatever it is that you're doing, the information is almost out of date immediately because it takes 4 or 5 years or longer. The stuff that you're learning in school is kind of quite aged in lots of cases. You know, it's not as up to date. And then you've got this, like you're talking to a teacher as a great example there of what I'm saying. What's Chat GPT? You know, so there's kind of like a gap, isn't there, between the sort of traditional education and maybe the learning that you do once you leave that sort of area of education. What are your thoughts on that? What are you passionate about in that space, Samantha?
You know, one of my favorite things to do is listen carefully to people. And it's not just what they say, it's how they say it, what their background is. Like when I was chatting up with this guy during an waiting for an appointment, I just asked him a little bit about himself. And it was enough that I knew how to teach him about ChatGPT. I mean, I could have taught him anything on ChatGPT, but I knew he was a teacher. And so I tailored the experience specifically for him. Well, his mind just went like this because he was able to check the accuracy of the information because it was in a domain that he was already familiar with. And I think with the education system, if we had more they don't have to be polymaths, a polymathic thinker. So someone who's already like very diverse and trying to add a lot of domains, they make excellent teachers because when you listen to a child, you can, or someone you're teaching, you can pick up what are their interests. Are they interested in gaming? Are they interested in social media? Are they interested in maybe becoming a doctor? And the more you know about each of those domains, the more as a teacher and instructor, you can tailor the education experience that makes them get passionate about it because what you're teaching to them is relevant to what they're already interested in. And that's where the school system fails. And I get that it has to work. It works the way it does because it's essentially like it's efficient education. However, we have to remember something that's really important. The education system was built during the time of Henry Ford, when we were all about assembly lines and having a specialty job and doing one thing to suit the assembly line. And really, a school is an assembly line in a lot of ways. And the other thing that I just want to note for any listeners is the education system is an overreaction to the Russians going to space with Sputnik. So think about that again. A lot of the education system we have today is an overreaction to the Russians going to space. Because think about the science and mathematical emphasis in schools, which really isn't what we use in everyday life. And a lot of taking out of the arts because, they don't pay, let's just say. However, the arts are all about mental health. It's actually not about paying necessarily, though they can be paid positions. And we wonder why we have a mental health crisis. Well, we took out all of the great things that are about mental health, like music. Composing music is an expression. It's a way to process information, to process our emotions. We took it out. Art, and a way to process process the world around us in a unique way. We took it out.
Yeah, it's
So I think,
fascinating. Thanks, Samantha, because the UK market, for example, Rishi Sunak, who's the current prime minister, but who knows, this time tomorrow, next week, they seem to get through prime ministers pretty quick these days. But there was a
right.
huge debate only a little while back about, oh, you must focus on maths. You must focus on maths. And while I'm not saying that maths isn't important, but there was a huge pushback about arts and the humanities from a
Yeah.
lot of areas. And it's quite interesting to think. I hadn't thought about it in the sort of context of the space race. It's quite interesting in terms of that context.
Well, just one more thing to add to the education. Self-awareness with which comes with humanities, as well as awareness about culture and other people's perspectives, is all in that realm of the humanities. And that's what we're taking out. So now I really excelled at math and I loved math. Like it was my favorite subject. I love the black and white, the black and white and the lines of it. But I do understand for the majority of the population, there is no therapy in math. It's actually, it's so frustrating to them. And in fact, it makes them hate learning. So you can push something all you want, but if the lack of passion is there, they will resent the learning, all of the learning, not just the math.
Yeah, it's a good point. And one of the things I want to ask you before we move on to a few other things is today's busy lifestyle, the rate of tech developments, just as one
Right.
example. Do you think now that people are having to become this sort of polymathic way of living because it's just very hard to keep up? So are you finding
Mhm.
people just sort of check out and like, let's not bother get involved, or they're really almost exhausted trying to keep up? Like, where does it fit in, Samantha?
Well, that's actually, I'm going to try to simplify that. People are made with different capacities. People who are polymathic, I will say, have a higher capacity than other people do. And so potentially helping people come to that realization will be helpful. If you realize that you have a high capacity, you're able to do more. If you realize and come to terms with the fact that you're the kind of person that has a lower capacity, a specialty is probably more, it will be more of a fit for you. And there is room for both. However, as we saw during COVID, that a lot of specialties became completely extinct. And so this idea of being polymathic is important, but we're also seeing a young generation who wants more. They don't want to do the same thing for life. We rarely see someone being in the same profession of life. And the thing that people don't realize is you don't have to pursue three passions at once. There's different kinds of polymathic journeys. Some are consecutive. You learn one for 10 years. Actually, you could actually really master things much shorter. And then you learn another one, and then you learn another one. I think what's important is that we need to focus on what I call skill stacking. So skill stacking is very important. So my first YouTube that's coming out is on finance. And so I start talking about ways that people, money mistakes that keep people broke because I have this finance background. But partway through the video, I start to talk about the concept of skill stacking. Now, if you understand input, right, and output, which is really income's going in and expenses are going out. Well, you can take those same concepts for when you're working with relationships. That's skill stacking. And this is what polymaths do very naturally. So I think we can just teach that, because then if your skill set becomes obsolete, you'll realize what's transferable. So in the video, I talk about how in your life, if you have a lot of people who are really draining you a lot, well, that's like being in debt. You don't have a lot of people who are feeding into and you feel good around them, you're going to feel burnt out, just like being in debt. So the concept actually works in relationships. And so you can say to myself, you know what, I'm running in a deficit in my relationships right now. So I need to either reduce the outputs and increase the inputs, or I need to make those adjustments. And that's what we really need to be teaching in school, is what we call applied skill sets. So obviously, things are going obsolete, but how can I take this information and transfer it to another domain? And then we won't have this problem of people becoming obsolete.
I really love that, Samantha. I love the term skill stacking. I think that's brilliant.
Thank
And
you.
it's so true. It's so true. And, from your finance background, obviously, that makes a lot of sense. But, as you mentioned already, you're the managing partner and the CFO of Prairie Land Farms, right?
Yeah.
You've also got this other business, which is the CEO of Smart Arrow, and then you've got everything
Right.
else that we've kind of touched on. So
Yeah.
you kind of have all these skills, and they sort of almost complement each other from what I'm
Mhm.
taking from what you're saying there, which I think is so important in today's world, because I think we're long past the one job, one or two careers for life, and you're done, and you retire with a a safe pension. I don't think anybody's in that world anymore. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't see it very often. And just when you talk about skill stacking, it's hard to not have a conversation on a daily basis at the moment without the word AI coming into it. And
Right.
a lot of people, there's a lot of doomsayers about, oh, look at all the jobs it's going to take away. And then you've got the other side of that argument saying, oh, yes, but it creates so much opportunity and it'll create new jobs. And well, what are they? Well, we're not really sure yet. We're still figuring that out. But what you're saying is a little bit different. What you're doing is you're saying, well, look, here's a tool to help you stack those skills. So regardless of what the future looks like, what that landscape looks like, you're more agile, you can adapt, you can apply yourself. And it seems like it's grounded in that sort of way of the way that polymaths are. But you're also saying, and please interrupt me if I'm getting this wrong, that you don't have to be a polymath to apply some of this stuff, right? You can just take some of these building blocks and it can really help you in life.
Yeah, I think just understanding that everything you learn is transferable in some way. It's sort of like, for example, I was the marketing strategist for the Global Leadership Summit in my area. And I was inviting everyone, like parents and a lot of people in my network, because I was just so excited about it. And I have a business degree. So, I really love leadership development and business. And I remember a few of the moms coming to me during the break and saying, none of this applies to me. Like, this was a complete waste. Why did you recommend it? And I realized they needed someone to connect the dots for them. So the main MC, I went and talked to him halfway through and I said, after the next segment, can you please take the leadership concepts and say, make it sound personal. So in this case, it was the multiplier factor. And so what he said at the break was, I can use this with my parenting. If each of my kids has a role, together we can accomplish so much more. And all he did was take a management leadership concept and help take their minds and take that concept and move it over to their home as a parent, because almost all leadership concepts work in parenting. And so and then the ladies came to me and after and goes, oh, that just blew my mind. Like, wow. And I was just like, okay, that's right. We need people to teach us how what you're learning can transfer into other domains. And that's the skill that needs to be taught in school.
Like that a lot. Thanks, Samantha. Well, look, I want to change gear a little bit now, and I want to ask you a few questions, because one of the things we like
Oh,
to
sure.
do on this show is share a little bit more about how the person thinks, not just what they're
Okay.
doing and what they're passionate about. And one of the things that I like to ask is about learning styles and the books that you read, the the
Okay.
the type of stuff that you're attracted to. How does information go in? Because you've obviously got to keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on. Do you like reading books? Do you read for business, for pleasure, for both? Are you an audiobook person? Are you constantly on social media, scouring the internet? Or do you prefer learning in a visual style, maybe YouTube videos, or is it just meeting people? What works for you when it comes to onboarding information, Samantha?
To be honest, it would be all of those because each of them have something different to offer to the game, right? But I would say at this point in my life, I'm older and a little bit more confident and very experienced and an expert in multiple fields. So I'm more likely to supplement my information or supplement my learning as opposed to learning something from the foundation up. But you know what my absolute favorite is my favorite books are people. Like when I meet someone and I hear about their story or a little bit and we have a conversation together, well, you can't help become a part of each other. You've literally created a symbiotic experience together and a journey together. And to be honest, the best learning is by people's personal experiences and their perspectives, because the more you learn from that, the more you can take it into your real life. And there's so much more memorable because there's a kinetic to it, right? Especially if you're next to them, there's an actual energy. I don't know how many people know this, but we actually do have magnetic fields around us. And when we're next to someone, your body actually feels somebody's uh, electromagnetic energy. And so that makes it more memorable. So I definitely like this. This will be a memorable conversation than had I, even though we're not next to each other, but had I read about you, that's a lot different. You and I know each other from different circles, but I've never actually seen you. I've never seen the way you move your head, the way you laugh at certain things. And that is what really fascinates me. So I'll say that. Other than that, if I was to read books, I'm definitely more of a nonfiction, which, just a little side note, I hate the word. It means like non-fantasy. Who would name books that? Like, I just think, why would you call something a non-something? But anyway, some of my favorites, I actually brought some out because I knew you were going to ask me about that. This was one of my favorites. It really opened up the world to me. I think we should be teaching emotional intelligence in schools. We definitely don't do enough of self-mastery in schools. And then one of my other favorite authors is definitely Adam Grant. He's really about the outliers, the out of the box thinkers. But I will say that one of my most transforming books, which is going to sound super weird, is this book called Strengths-Based Leadership. And why I'm going to bring it up for a reason, because I think this is really relevant to a lot of people who are listening. When we're in school, we're taught to identify our weaknesses and then work on them. I know my bachelor degree was like that in business. Do you take all these assessments and then what are your weaknesses? Well, now you need to train some more and get a bunch of upgrading in your weaknesses. So that makes sense. It made a lot of sense to me. And then when I did my master's a few years ago, they had us do this book. And it blew my mind. They said, here's your assessment. They didn't talk about our weaknesses at all, literally listed our top strengths and said, this is where you're naturally inclined. This is where you're going to have energy. This is where it's going to be easy for you. You can acknowledge your weaknesses. I won't call them weaknesses. I will say this is where you bring other people in who have those strengths, and together you make a dynamic team. And that's what should be going on in schools. Like when we see children who are really passionate about certain subjects, let them get A's in it. Who cares if they get an F in, well, maybe we don't want them to get an F, but who cares if they only get a 50 or 60% in one of those other courses? When you try to level them out and make them work on those courses like math, if it's one of them, all of their grades go down, their self-esteem goes down, their energy goes down. They can't even work on their strengths because they're so bogged down by trying to work on the weaknesses, which isn't a natural inclination for them. So I will say that is one of my favorite books. I've done it. I was in a leader impact group with a bunch of executives in the city, and I brought the book, and they just said it changed even the way they did their business. They had all their employees do the assessments and then even rearranged some of their roles so that more of them were working in their strengths, and it changed their businesses. So it's one of my favorite books.
Thanks for sharing that, Samantha. And it's so refreshing to hear that, because so often, aren't we? We're told, we're almost instructed to work on your weaknesses, to improve your weaknesses. And a lot of energy goes into that. Whereas if you just double down on your strengths, you'd see massive gains. Of course, you can
Yeah.
improve weaknesses, but they're never going to, in a lot of cases, they're never going to become the strength or the thing that you're passionate about or the thing that you're naturally adapted to. And I think that's such an important point. And I really love what you said about your favorite book as a person. I think that's incredible. So thank you for that. That one's staying in. I love that.
Well, today I get to read the Simon Hodgins book, and today you're reading the Samantha Postman book. And so it's, I just really love it. So
yeah,
it's great.
no, it's a great phrase. I love that. Thanks, Samantha. The next thing I want to ask you is about throughout your journey. Now, whether it's doing thousands and thousands of tax returns and all the wonderful people you've met in that area, or whether it's the farming work that you do and the enterprise that you have there, or in the consulting world, or the sort of polymath mastery type work that you're involved in, and speaking, and all those other areas that I know that you're engaged with. There must be people that you admire too. There must be people that inspire you, that you maybe look up to, or people that are giving you a helping hand. Or is it a particular personality or character trait? But when I ask you that question, what springs to mind for you, Samantha?
People are going to think I'm crazy. And I'm not just saying this because it's a big name right now, but I actually really admire, well, two people. One, I admire Leonardo da Vinci. I think I really resonate. He's not current. So if I'm allowed to pick a historical person, he even though he had his father was very affluent, he was born to a mom outside of the marriage. And so he was an illegitimate child in a lot of ways. And so I really resonate a lot with the disadvantage he had and the judgment that he had because of it, but still rose above it. In some ways, what's really cool, what people don't understand, is that by being in a disadvantaged place, you have lower expectations on you. And so then you get to explore who you are more in many ways. And so I really admire what he did. The modern one that I would have is actually Elon Musk, and simply because he's bold, he's brilliant, he's innovative, and he has a sense of humor. And yeah, he's, by his own admittance, he's on the autistic spectrum. So he definitely lacks social skills, as we can all see on Twitter sometimes, because he says awkward things and inappropriate things. But I really admire his tenacity to push through when he knows in his heart that he's got something that's going to help an idea or a passion that's going to help a lot of people. And even though he gets so much flack, he at great personal cost to him, and people do not understand the personal cost. He has guards that even go in the bathroom with him because he cannot be left alone. Like, he has an enormous personal cost, but he's still willing to work for what he believes is the best of is his contribution for humanity. So he's with that one person who inspires me when it comes to that part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, Da Vinci being a very famous polymath, but he also had no formal education. Just to come back, just to link it back to what we were talking about,
Right.
and he wasn't a prolific painter. He didn't, it wasn't the story that you think it's a fascinating story in terms of being born out of wedlock and not having that sort of formal education that other people around him had. So that's a great choice. And I suppose Elon Musk, he's kind of got his supporters and his detractors, people that really can't
Yeah.
stand him and people that think he's the best thing. But I often refer to when something is happening and I don't agree with it, where Elon Musk is concerned, I think what Mark Benioff said, who's quite a smart guy, the CEO of Salesforce, and he said, don't write him off, don't underestimate him and don't write him off, or words to that effect, because
Yeah.
he has had absolute moments of brilliance. And it's very hard to write somebody off that can do that. And as you say, push through very difficult circumstances. And, when you look into some of the previous things, even post the PayPal days, there's been some real challenges. I mean, real significant challenges. But of course, we see the headlines and we click the links, But thank you.
But he pushes through them, and he acknowledges mistakes. And as someone of that is very rare to see. And that's why I really admire him. He pushes through. And then when he makes a mistake, he will be one of the first ones to say, I totally messed up on that. I learned from it. This is what I'm going to do different from here on. And he's very open about it for the most part. Obviously, there's so much more going on with him than we understand. But yeah, anyway, that's kind of where I'm at with that. Obviously, there's some other people that inspire me, but those are the ones that came up to mind today.
That's perfect.
Also, if anyone's interested, there's a book about Leonardo da Vinci from Walter Isaacson that I definitely would recommend. It's quite the book, so it's like massive. But Walter Isaacson actually writes books on polymaths. And he's writing one on Elon Musk, actually. He was there when he opened with Twitter on the first day. There's a picture of him. And I would say it's one of my favorite books as well, is this Leonardo da Vinci book. It really gives you an inside look. And I would say that during his time, he was not famous like we see now. We see things with hindsight, but in his own time, he was not as famous as we see him now. In fact, what he was really known for is what he wasn't, that we don't really know him for. One of the things he was most known for was his ability to create stage productions. So creating plays and stages was a very big thing with kings and nobles. And he did, because of his engineering background and his artist background, and ability to do special effects. One of the major roles that they hired him for, interestingly enough, was like taking care of stages and plays, which is what we don't really even know him for today.
Yeah, no, it's great. And that author, I think, did the Steve Jobs book as well, another great thinker,
Benjamin Franklin.
creative.
Yeah, there's quite a few.
Yeah, great. The thing I wanted to go on to, which kind of relates to that sort of people that we admire and people that maybe inspire you, is about advice. Now, you share
Mm.
a lot of great advice with people, but I'm interested in if there's advice that you've picked up along the way that's really important to you, that stick with you, that help you through life, business or personal life, and or if there's advice that you'd like to share with our international audience today that you think is really important in life.
It's very simple, actually. The simple advice is that I was given when I was very young is you can do anything you set your mind to. And it came from my mom. She was pregnant with me when she was 16 years old. I was a welfare kid. A lot of dads in and out of the house, and a lot of trauma and disruptiveness and disparity, and a lot of things I mean, a lot of my learning comes from not just my educational, but a lot of worldly experience. And when I give advice, I hear people's hearts, and I hear their hearts hurting and they're suffering, and I know what it feels like. So it's very easy for me to want to help. And so for me, giving advice is really about trying to help people's lives be better, even if it's just slightly better, that they have an extra lift in their step or feel like they've got confidence to embrace what's in front of them today. But one thing that my mom did say, regardless of what happened when I was a child, because I was born to a single rebellious mom, she was not the one that surprised them next door. She was the one that everyone expected it next door. She really was about nonconformity. And I grew up without all these societal conformity that a lot of people have. And she would always say to me, you can do anything you set your mind to. And I really think that I'm going to get emotional. It has really governed me today, because I don't see boundaries where other people do, or I will acknowledge them. I see them in the form, but I don't actually take them personally. And so I that's my best advice. And you can do anything if you set your mind to it. Something that you talk a lot about all these things that I've done, but people will ask me, okay, Samantha, but what about your family? They must have suffered along the way because you're doing all of these things. However, what they don't understand is that actually, out of everything that I've done in my life, that's what I'm most proud of. And not just because I'm a female, you'll hear a lot of females say this sort of thing. It's really, I grew up without those role models. I grew up, if you come from a divorced home, you're 80% more likely to be divorced. Well, my mom was divorced lots of times. And the man who raised me died in a car accident when I was 10. So I didn't actually have any idea how to be a parent, how to raise a good family, but I did it. And I have 3 young adult children. And each of them will say, I love you, mama. They come over, they hug me, we go on trips together. The oldest one had his dad stand up at his wedding as is part of his groomsmen party. And they call us, all the time, and they hang out with us, and we're like pretty much best friends. And so, like, all these things that we did them together. When I went on a professional photography shoot, I brought my kids along with me, and they weren't bored. They were active participants. Sometimes they probably were bored, but they got to do some really cool things. And of course, farm life is very integrated. If anyone comes from a farm, the farm and family is very integrated. And so I will say that even though I was able to accomplish or achieve a lot, my biggest achievement, I've been married in June, it will be 29 years. And I have a grandson, another grandchild on the way. And you have no idea how amazing it is to be next to the man that you married at 20, by the way. I got married at 20. Be next to them and then be able to do that part of your life together, and know that that is your biggest accomplishment, that you were able to do that. And so I'm going to take this opportunity to inspire people. I don't know where people are, and maybe they've already, in a broken relationship, but you can redeem them and you can break your family line. And I did it. And if I can do it, you can too.
That's so wonderful. And it's true success, Samantha, and congratulations, because it's such a wonderful turn. I really appreciate you sharing that with us. And that sort of almost guiding principle that you took from your mom, I could tell, it still means something today. It's still important. It still helps you to move forward and to maybe push through, right? Where you're saying, Yeah, you can do anything, Samantha, and look, 29 years later, you're doing something right, that's for sure. So it's all
Try.
working,
It's not always
yeah,
perfect,
it's ups
but
and downs, right?
we just
Yeah,
round up. We round up for that's what I teach. I am into math and we just round up. That's what I tell everyone. They're like,
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not
yeah.
perfect. I'm like, don't worry, I'm rounding you up.
I think that's the best strategy, right? As long as you're just slightly heading in the right direction, I think you're doing better than most. I,
Exactly.
Thanks, Samantha. Look, the other thing I want to ask you about, because I don't want to run out of time. I want to squeeze a couple of extra questions in before we come to an end here. And I like to ask
Okay.
people about what they've got on the horizon. What are they thinking about? And how do
Mhm.
they plan? Do you work, month to month, 3 months in advance, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months? I'm sure farming, you got to think quite a long time in advance as well. So how does it work for you in terms of planning, in terms of thinking ahead, and what's on your horizon? What are you hoping to do, achieve, etc., in your world?
Actually, I haven't been asked that in a long time. I would say that I take the farming approach and we think of things in seasons. Like you said, you talk about years, but in farming, we don't really plan in years. That year, because we don't know what the weather is going to do. And I mean, when you're a city person, live in the city, you feel like you have so much control of your life and you can put your 5-year plan in and all of this, but it's really not like that. Where when you're in farming, you could say, I need to have the crop in by this date. Well, it starts to rain and we get a storm. And so no, it's a week later or 2 weeks later. Even in harvest season, we'll be in the thick of it, and all of a sudden we'll get a crazy wind. Where I live, it's one of the windiest areas in the country, and 100-kilometer winds sometimes. And literally, if it's during harvest season and the plant is ripe, it literally will just burst and pop out all over the field. Like in one strong wind, we could lose $100,000 of revenue. And we always say to people, like around here, we say, you can't count it till it's in the bin. And even then, you could get bugs in the bin, or it could spoil and you lose the bin. Like you lose what happens in the bin, or lose the crop in the bin. And so I actually approach most things that way.
And Samantha, just coming on to the farming for a little bit, there's a very successful program that Amazon promotes heavily. And I'm not sure if people watching or listening to this discussion have seen it, but it features Jeremy Clarkson, was very famous for a show, an automotive show, a car show called Top Gear. It became an international show, and it was shown on the BBC. It was shown on BBC World, and it was then picked up by Amazon, something called the Grand Tour. But his latest show is something called Clarkson's Farm. And what I didn't realize, from the city dweller's perspective, is the amount of work that goes into it, how much cost is poured into it. Whether it's harvesting the crop and having to get the moisture right at the exact time to harvest the crop, and how you can easily lose an awful lot of money, and the hardship that goes into providing some of the things that we depend on. And you must experience that too, as somebody that runs and manages and has, founded a farm business.
Yeah, this is a little close to my heart. People don't really understand the cost. And I'm not just talking about financial cost, the cost that goes into producing food for people to eat and survive. Because I did taxes, I was able to see that this isn't just my own farm. I'm going to get a little bit emotional. If people had any idea how many farmers go into serious debt in order to feed them. It was not uncommon for me to see a farm, and even my own farm, to have a negative number of $1 to $200 to $300,000 or more in a year, and yet we were able to feed 5 million people, and we ran it at a loss. I used to see sometimes clients where the farm wasn't doing well, and not because of management reasons. It's because the markets change. We have absolutely no control over what we get for our grain. For example, bread. The price of bread in my country has gone up 300%, but we have not got a 300% increase in the cost in what we get for our wheat. In fact, we get like 20 cents or something like that, and they sell it for over $3 in the market. But our cost to produce that loaf of bread has gone up significantly, so our margins are lower. But what I used to see is sometimes the wife of the farmer would go and work part-time or full-time in order to subsidize the farm so that the farm could use food. Because farmers have a mission. It's an inner mission, and they are about producing food for the world. They might not say it like that, but that's who they are, and they take it seriously, and they will take significant losses. And I'll just give you a number for my particular farm. We run a crop farm. It costs us approximately, depending on the year, approximately $1 million to put the crop in. Sometimes we only get $750,000 at the end of the day. So I'm running a $250,000 deficit in order to feed the world, and millions of people are fed off of this. And so it has to do with weather. It has to do with government rules. Like now they're talking about something that people don't understand is that they're talking about reducing our fertilizer consumption by 30%. Well, we're already doing absolutely everything we can to reduce the fertilizer. If you have any idea what it costs for fertilizer, it's insane. So we're doing everything we possibly can to be innovative, and then to cut it will mean, I'm going to tell you the dead honest truth. All of these people, you need to understand this. These government rules mean that millions and millions of people are going to starve and die because we simply will have less food. And they think it's for environmental reasons. I'm going to leave with it. I want to make sure that people understand this. Everyone does this. So on the farm, if you tell me that I have to use 30% less fertilizer and it's forced, and I've already been reducing it anywhere I can and more innovative, certain crops need less fertilizer. So pulse crops like peas, for example, need less fertilizer. So what's going to happen is farmers have to survive, or they can't run the farm. They can't feed their own families. They'll feed millions of people and won't be able to feed their own families. It's not like we use our own grain to eat. We don't, we ship it. In order to feed their own families, they will have to change. And you know what they'll do? They'll start growing crops that will reduce their fertilizer consumption. Well, guess what will happen? We'll have an overabundance of peas and lentils and pulse crops. Well, here's the thing with those. They have a very small stalk, and they break down, and they don't actually put more nitrogen. Like the actual stalk itself doesn't have a lot more nitrogen to put into the soil. So what's going to happen is we're going to end up with more runoff and environmental problems because we need to crop rotate for pest reasons and soil and the health of the soil. Just like your garden, you would never put tomatoes on top of tomatoes on top of tomatoes on top of tomatoes, right? It's not good for the soil. You have to rotate your garden. We'll put that on a big scale. Imagine if all I'm doing is putting crops in that don't need much fertilizer. Now, all of a sudden, your bread, which grows on wheat, which needs fertilizer, the price of bread is going to go through the roof because we won't be producing wheat because we can't use fertilizer. It just will be impossible. And so people don't understand that these forced regulations, without working with farmers who love the land more than anyone else, they take care of that land. They love the land like it's their child. You cannot force these things. And I'm telling you that all these environmental things that they say you're going to get is actually not true. And maybe you'll end up cutting some of this out, but we use grains for fuel. Well, what happens when we reduce the production of grain worldwide? These forced fertilizer reductions. So this is a biofuel. Well, what are you going to use? They're going to have to go back to coal or something else. And so the ramifications of these forced government regulations is very hard on us. So not only are we trying to produce food for the world at a loss some years, we're treated as if we're trying to kill people. We're treated as if we're not trying to take care of the environment. And we're treated as a bunch of dumb farmers. Farmers are the most innovative people in the world. You should see, like, a farmer can do 20 different roles. They're welders and construction workers. They're trying to make food. I mean, they're amazing. So I want people to understand that when you have a separation between your food, what's at the table, and watching what's really going on, it's very easy to be judgmental and put all these regulations on. But I promise you that everything that went at that grocery store that you picked up and put in your cart has a massive generational story behind it. Somebody, a family, put their heart, their money, their sweat, their tears, everything into making sure that you had that apple to eat. And that's what people need to understand about farming. So I'm glad that you're learning more about it, because it's a very, I mean, without it, we can't live.
Yeah, and
So I hope I
it's so
explained that well.
no, you did, and you made some really, really important points because sometimes you just assume it will always be there, but it seems to, when you look at it through a certain lens, it's also such a fragile ecosystem that could
Mhm.
easily cause very very big problems. And there are people already struggling now, particularly in the farming, food production world. It's not easy. And I know it's kind of wrapped up in a sustainability type argument, but ultimately, we have to produce food that sustains life. It back to your Elon Musk discussion earlier. One of the biggest problems with uh, having a colony on Mars or anywhere is the production of food and things that can sustain life. Because
Mhm.
if you can't do that, you've constantly got to travel backwards and forwards from Earth for the stuff that you need to keep the human alive. So that
And
production
then
of food, yeah,
the
the cost,
cost to go and get it is
yeah,
actually exceeds what you save by moving people to Mars. Do you see what's
right,
happening? Though, like
right.
you try to save one ecosystem, but the actual effect is larger. So I'll leave you with this. I don't know if you know something called the Cobra effect. There's actually another name for it, but I can't recall it at the moment. And where it comes from is in India, they had a cobra problem in a particular city. And so the government officials decided that they need to do something about the overpopulation of cobras. So they put a bounty on cobras. So you could bring in I don't remember if it's the tail or what it was, but you could bring in something from the cobras and you would get paid. Well, guess what happened? Entrepreneurship happened. And so people started breeding cobras and then killing them and taking them in so that they could get this money for the cobras. Well, then the government obviously figured out what was happening, that people were breeding cobras to earn an income. So then they quit the whole program. Well, now the entrepreneurs aren't making any money and they don't want to feed all these cobras. So what do? They released the cobras. And guess what? They had more cobras than they did before they put in this government regulation. So we call this the Cobra effect. And so this is exactly what's going to happen. And like what you're saying about the space thing, we move people over there for sustainability, but then you end up with all these other effects, and often they're larger than the problem you had to begin with. And this is what's happening with farming. In Europe, we see they're trying to buy farms. And we see this mandated fertilizer use. And it's the Cobra effect over and over and over again. But they don't talk to farmers who try to explain to them that you're going to end up with larger environmental problems than what you already have. Let's work together come up with some innovative ways to solve the problems we have.
No, it's a fascinating topic and a very complex subject once you start getting into
Yeah.
it. And uh, sometimes governments around the world can make decisions that are popular, but they have those unintended consequences, and that Cobra effect, or that perverse incentive, I think, where you think you're doing something right, but actually, ultimately, it's a short-term win for a lot of long-term pain. And yeah,
Yeah,
we
that's
need
a
to
good way
be,
to say that.
very mindful of that, I think. But thanks for sharing that, Samantha. So how does it work for you in terms of planning, in terms of thinking ahead, and what's on your horizon? What are you hoping to do, achieve, etc., in your world?
I take it seasonally. This is what I'm doing at the season in my life. And now it might not be a farm season or spring or summer or fall, but it's like, this is what I'm doing at the season in my life. So my kids right now are all grown up. They don't really need me the same way they did before. And so for the season, this is what I'm working on. Right now, I'm going to be building a YouTube channel up because I really want to teach people life skills. I want to build up my public speaking, and I'm relaunching a new website where I'm going to be doing more business consulting, but it's more micro, right? Where you call me or you tell me your scenario and I help you solve a problem, and do it very, very quickly. So those are things I can do in seasons. I'm not committing anything to 5 years or 10 years. Those are things that I commit in seasons because life happens. Most people don't know this, but when I was 35 years old, I got really sick and I ended up actually in a wheelchair part-time. And I had a tax consultancy business that I had built up. My kids were in elementary. We were running the farm. And I was doing a little bit of professional photography. And I went from Wonder Woman to absolutely zero. Like I was in bed for months. A year and a half later, the government sent me to Mayo Clinic because they just didn't even know what to do with me. It took 6 years. 6 years of my life that I was practically an invalid in many, many ways. I couldn't hold a conversation. I used to have large parts of the tax code memorized. I couldn't even talk for 10 minutes and track everything you said. So it took 6 years to build it up. And even though the doctors told me I may never be the same again, obviously, I'm not one to ever like listen to what everyone, take other people's boundaries as my own. And that's its own story, actually, how I got my brain back. But I really realized that for a season, this is what I'm doing. And whatever happens, if my children need me or something happens within my family, I'm ready to say, you know what, I'm going to have to switch to a different season. So I know it's not the answer you like, because everyone wants to hear my big 10-year plan or my big 5-year plan. But I honestly think that all that happens is when it doesn't work out the way you planned out perfectly, which it rarely does, you just get angry at yourself and the world. And it's better to just live better in the present of where you are and do the best that you can and enjoy it and embrace who you are right now and what your life is like. And then tomorrow will be tomorrow.
Do you know, I think it's a wonderful answer, Samantha. It's exactly the answer that I love, because, 1 minute life is going great and the next minute something happens, and in the
Yeah.
blink of an eye, something changes. And I think sometimes, maybe as I get older too, it happens around you, it happens within your own family, and something will happen that you weren't expecting, and it can change things quite dramatically, quite quickly. And obviously your scenario, and having to sort of, I can hear mom in your ear saying, come on, you can do this, Samantha, you can drive through, you can do anything you want. But 6 years is a long time, it's a long time to go through. And it's really refreshing to hear that kind of an answer. And I really like, don't count it till it's in the bin. That sort of farming expression, because, and then even then you're saying, well, I'm not quite
Well,
100% because it might
now
spoil
it's
in the
more
bin.
like don't count it till you have a check in your hand, and you've hauled it
Exactly,
in
yeah.
and you have a check in your hand is probably closer. But yeah,
Now, yeah,
I think it's really important to set yourself up for success, but also set yourself up not to be resentful of life, because life is going to happen with no matter all the planning you do in the world. So you can have a guide. Like I have a guide. Where do I want to be in 5 years? I kind of have an idea where I want to be in 5 years, but I'm willing to be versatile, like a polymath is, and embrace each season to the best that I can. And here's the thing. You have one life to live. That's it. You're only going to live it for you and no one else.
that's so true. And do you think that skills stacking that you've obviously been stacking a lot of skills, does that give you a certain sense of confidence that whatever this season brings, I'll probably be able to deal with it at this stage?
I mean, obviously that comes with age. I think especially for women, when we hit 40, we just get to this, like, honestly, we don't really care so much what other people think. It's like we step in, it's super common. We step into our own skin and we're more confident about who we are. But I also think it's the skill stacking. For me, when I hit my 40s, I was overcoming this crazy illness that doctors thought I would never overcome. Like they told me, you're going to be like that. You could be like this for the rest of your life. And so for me, I definitely got a lot more confidence through my journey in that. But I will say that the more you learn, the easier it is to grab something else. Like, for example, I started learning Spanish. Well, I have a bit of French in my background. And so whenever when you understand how skill stacking works, the world is your oyster. You can say, oh, I want to learn this. Well, all you have to do is say to yourself, what's similar that I already know? Well, I understand how French structure works. So I just say to myself, oh, I already know that French structure, the sentence structure of French. So Spanish is exactly the same structure. Well, that makes that easy. And then I say to myself, oh, and I listen to Spanish speakers. I hear a lot of English words sound like English. So I go and Google it. Well, apparently there's over 1,000 words that have what's called an English cognate. So university with a Y becomes universidad. So all of a sudden now I know 1,000 words in Spanish because I already know the English, right? And then, so that's how we skill stack. I say, well, I already know English really well. I'm confident about that. I know some French. Well, now if I want to use Spanish, what can I use from those other two skills I have? And that's the advantage of age and with skill stacking. And what I see now, I work with a lot of entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are really polymathic, or they will become polymaths. You have to wear every hat all the time. and they skill stack very quickly. The young generation does that quite quickly. But with ChatGPT, we're able to do even more. I'm just going to give you a little scenario that people don't really realize. ChatGPT is the ultra polymath. You can ask it to be anyone. You can ask it to be an astronaut. You can ask it to be a dietitian. You can ask it to be a teacher. You can ask it. You prompt it and say, right now you are this, and I need you to answer from that perspective. You literally have access to a ultra polymath.
No, I hadn't even thought of it in that context, and you're absolutely right. It is I mean, look, it's an incredible tool. There's huge advantages. There's a few concerns, and we could spend
Yeah, for
another
sure.
week talking about those. But yeah, you're right. You can prompt it. Prompt engineer it. You can get some well thought words into there that say, hey, act as this person in this type of context, and it will, to the best of its ability, from the data that it's
Yeah.
using, come up with great information that's probably better than 90% of the stuff that most people would have come up on their own with. So yeah, fantastic.
One shortfall that it won't be able to do is take connections across domains at this point. So a polymath can do like what I was telling you earlier about when I'm teaching finance. I'm like, okay, here's the concepts of finance. You understand input, output, income, expenses. Well, now that you understand those foundational ideas, okay, now let's transfer them to other domains. Well, ChatGPT isn't going to necessarily do that. That's why you need to hire a polymath, because they're going to listen to you and go, well, here, like I did some consulting for a lady, and she thought her her market was one specific one. And after talking to her, I was like, are you kidding me? This actually is a whole market over here. And she was like, wait, what? And then I told her, and she's like, I just had no idea. But because I saw the similarities, I was able to introduce her to a whole new market. And she went to market 3 months earlier than she had projected, actually. So
That's a great
that's
point.
why
Yeah.
hiring a polymath can be very helpful, because we're able to cross domains very quickly and see what similarities do you have to offer that other markets also can tap into and want from you.
Very good. Thank you. And look, as we come towards the end of our time now, there's only a couple of things I need to ask you. And one is,
Okay.
if there's any other area of your life that you're involved in that maybe I haven't asked you about, or maybe you want to re-emphasize something that we've touched on already, what is that? And secondly, and importantly, Samantha, if people want to get in touch with you, connect with you, and find out more about all the things that you do, where's the best place to send people to?
Just my personal website, which will take you to everything else, samanthapostman.com. And from there, you can either hire me to do some consulting. You could hire me for speaking. I'm hoping to do some more public speaking again soon. And also I have a newsletter that I kind of had put on pause while I was revamping and rebranding. And so that's a really good place to get some good tips and tricks right out of there. And really, in my newsletter, it talks about skills that I think you can stack. So the one that's going to be coming out next week, next is on one where I actually talk about a game that I was playing with my kids. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute, because I used to play that game a lot, but now I'm looking through different eyes because I'm trying to teach people what I already know. Like, it's so inherent to me. I didn't know what I was doing. And so now I'm like, actually, I think everyone should learn this game. It's actually called Rummikub. And there's so much strategy because you have to move tiles around and remeld. Well, that skill is transferable. It's a skill stack. And you constantly have to move things around, whether it's at a wedding table and you have to move certain dynamics around to see who's sitting with who. It's very similar to the game Rummikub, actually, or your own product line. How do I move that around so it's sitting in the best scenario possible? And then the other thing is my friend George Silverman and I, George Silverman is 80 years old. And he actually is a polymath as well, way more accomplished than I am in many ways. And we're working on a book, but we end up making it on a course. And we're talking about calling it the Polymath Playbook. And so this is going to be for people who are an aspiring polymaths or on their way there. And what happens when you find out you're a polymath? What is a polymath? And I think it's pretty exciting. We're going to be running some Twitter spaces on it, which you know all about, and then inviting them into learning more. So again, if you've subscribed to my newsletter, then you'll be able to find out all about that when it's ready to go. So
That's great. So samanthapostman.com, probably the handiest place for people to find out everything.
yeah, that'd be the one. All right. I'm just relaunching a new one next week. So it's going to be all revamped and updated. My old podcast is actually taken off, so I don't have that up. But if someone wants to listen to something that I had a couple of years ago, want to kind of hear a little bit more of perspectives, I have an old podcast that you can just type into any podcast place. My name will come up. It used to be called Bold Perspectives, but there's some episodes on there that people really enjoy.
Well, look, that brings us nicely to the end of our time together today, Samantha. Continued success with everything that you're doing. I think it's wonderful. It's a very interesting world, and I've picked up an awful lot from our conversation. I should be talking an awful lot about tech stacking going forward, and not counting things till they're in the bin. And that I've picked up an awful lot. It's been a wonderful chat. So that brings us to the end. Thanks to everybody who's watching or listening to this episode around the world. Make sure that you like, follow, subscribe, and do everything that I need you to do to help support the global discussion. And I hope you'll join me back here for some more discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. So thank you, Samantha. It's been an absolute pleasure to catch up with you again today.
Awesome. It's great to be on here. You definitely made my day when we first started before the recording, and you said, you're all things creator, innovators, and thinkers. So you definitely made my day to be honored to be on your podcast today. And I enjoy everything that you do with the global interview, because highlighting leaders and creative and thinkers is really important, because although it might seem like we're really confident, it's when people like you approach us and affirm it, and it gives us confidence to be stronger and make more of an impact to other people. There's what I call a ripple effect. And so, you throw that stone over to me, and then that ripple effect just makes it stronger so that I'm able to work with more people. So I want to tell you that your role is really important for influencing, because when you support the people who support others, the outreach, the multiplier factor is so much more profound.
Well, you're very kind for saying. And look, we love creatives, leaders, and thinkers here. So you're definitely in the right place. You're definitely home here. So thank you, Samantha. Talk to you soon.
Thanks again.